Hello and welcome to the first episode of a little mini-series I'm going to do specifically for YouTube on Battletech Extended 3025 tactics or strategic approaches regarding your mechs and builds and stuff like that. So the first one I'm doing today will be on starter mechs. So when you first start the campaign or career, I'll probably more specifically be talking about career, but some of this stuff will apply to your campaign as well. How to go about fixing your mechs up, what's good, what's bad, what to use, how to use it, that kind of stuff. So let's crack on. So I've created a new character for the start of this. So we've got Timmy McTactics, and I've given him the call sign of Doyle, which is me. And let's have a look what we've rolled. Wow. Okay, so this is a really good roll. So basically, when you start a game, you get a variety of mechs with this mod that are rolled on from a pool of possible mechs. And so where we see this Vulcan 2T, the other possible mechs that could have been are a Cicada 2A, which is terrible. I'll get to that in either later on or another episode, as that is one of the worst mechs you could possibly get to start with. It's worse than the 20 tonners, believe me. Or it could have been Spider 5V. And out of those three, I would take the Vulcan 2T. So that's what I would consider a really good roll. The next slot, we've got the Urby, the Urban Mech R60. Which is loved or hated, depending on your point of view. I quite like it. I think it's pretty good because you're packing an AC-10 right from the start, which is a huge hitting weapon when you're at the beginning of the game, which is pretty good. Other things that could have been are the Commando 2D or the Panther 9R. Now, out of those three mechs, my favoured one to start with would be the Panther 9R. I think that's the best choice of those three. Well, you don't get a choice, it's a random roll, but it's the best you could roll of those three. But I'd say the Urby's not a bad stand-in for that. They play a similar role in terms of they will be a long-ranged mech, generally speaking. Of course, with Battletech, you can build stuff however you like, but I would say the Panther and the Urby are both best used for long range stuff. The next is the Firestarter FS9H, and this is, in my opinion, the best, or at least one of the best 35-ton light mechs around, and that is a very lucky roll to get that. Other options in this category are the Jenner, the JR7D, or the Javelin. That's the JVN 10N. And out of those three choices, the Firestarter wins it for me every single time, hands down. It's an absolutely amazing mech. 6 energy hard points, 6 support weapon hard points. You can cram that thing full of machine guns or energy weapons, depending on your preference, or a bit of both. And it's really good. Then after that, we are into the category where you roll twice on this pool of mechs. Okay, so what we have rolled is a Stinger, a 3G, and a Wasp 1A for the 20-ton pool. And other mechs that can be rolled in this little pool are the Locust 1E, the Locust 3V, the Wasp 1A, of course, the Stinger 3R, and the Stinger 3G. Now, out of all of these mechs, in my opinion, this bad boy here, the Stinger 3G, is the best 20-tonner. Now, you might be thinking, well, why are you even worrying about 20-tonners? Well, you start with at least 2 of them in this mod, and you will spend some time in light mechs as you build up. It's a slower start in this mod than you'll be used to from the vanilla game, and it's very, very different to Rogue Tech. So it is worth thinking about how good or bad your 20-tonners are, and the Stinger 3G, in my opinion, is by far the best 20-tonner, purely because it has 4 energy hard points, and yes, you can actually fit 4 medium lasers into it if you're willing to strip a little bit of armor down, lose the jump jets, etc. And it's great because it's hard to actually get 4 medium lasers in a lot of light mechs. at this level. So I think this one is the best by far. And then we've also rolled the Wasp 1A. It's not too bad. I'd rather have had another Stinger 3G or maybe even the Stinger 3R. The 3R comes with 3 support weapon hardpoints, I think, which would allow you to get some machine guns in. You can do some fun stuff with that. But the 1A is not bad, the Wasp 1A, and it's got 2 energy hardpoints and 1 single support weapon hardpoint. I wouldn't generally go for missiles in a 20-ton mech, but you do have 2 missile hardpoints if that's what you want to do. But we'll talk more about that later. So generally speaking, this is, out of all the careers I've played on this mod, this is the best start I've ever had, which is a shame because I've only done it for the purpose of doing this video. I already have a career on the go that I've been streaming for quite some time now, and I have a non-stream career on the go. I don't really need another one, but man, this is a good start. I would be quite happy with this if I just picked up, installed the mod and started to play. So that's basically how the start works. You know, you've got a pool of random mechs that can be rolled. You get 5 to start with. So some are better than others, but generally you're going to get a fair balanced spread of what you're starting with, and you've got to make the most of using these early on. And one of the ways of doing that, one of the first things I would recommend you do right at the beginning, is you fix up the armor levels of the mechs. Now, if we just go to refit on this urban mech here, you'll see that obviously when you're doing repairs and refits, it takes time and it costs money. However, if you just watch this, I'll strip these things out because, well, actually I'll show you why. Like, so for a start on this mech, movement, it moves 95 meters, sprints 165, and it can jump 90 meters. Not really that impressive a jump. It's just 2 jump jets that fit in this mech. I think personally they're pretty pointless, so I'm going to take them out. Heat efficiency, as you can see here, we're sinking 33 heat a turn at the moment, and our alpha strike, so that's if we fire all of our weapons, so both the AC-10 and the small laser, only generate 18 heat. So as you can see, the heat efficiency of this is way too high and pointless. So we're going to take out the heat sink as well. Now that's freed up 2 tons. And with those 2 tons, I'm going to hit the max armor button. And now I'm going to strip just 1 point off the back there, just so we can max these legs out. And we'll just double check, but every location except for just 5 points reduced off the rear center torso. Yep, that's maxed out for armor now, and we're 30 tons. Now, the reason I'll max out armor early on is because you want to up the survivability of your mechs as much as possible. And obviously, you know, you don't want to be taking damage, losing equipment when you've not got any to play with. You certainly don't want to be losing too many pilots early on, and so upping your mech survivability, in my opinion, is a really important thing to do. And as you can now see, it will take us 0 days to do that. So if I wanted to put equipment in this, it would take days to do, but since all I'm doing is taking stuff out and rejigging the armor levels, it will take me no time at all. So I'm not going to be sitting waiting while this happens. It's just going to happen instantly. Now, as things stand, this is not great with its initial build. The first thing I'd want to do is try to get hold of another ton of AC-10 ammo and stick that in the mech, and I'd probably remove the small laser as well. And then once you've done that, you maybe strip the rear down a little bit to free up that half a ton extra that you're going to need in order to get the extra ton of ammo in. So if you see, if I took that small laser out, I'd be on 29 out of 30 tons. That would afford me the extra ton of ammo. I'd move the ammo to the legs, and of course that would be the mech done, in my opinion. But that would cost a little bit more and would take me probably 2 days by the time I'd put the other ton of ammo in. Now, pretty much, I think everywhere you could start, almost everywhere. I've never had a start where I've not had a store. So yeah, I'm going to go with pretty much wherever you start, there's going to be a store, and you can buy ammo from that store. So if I wanted, I could just buy that ton of ammo, I could slap that in the mech, and I could call that finished at that. But for the time being, for the purpose of this exercise, we're not going to bother doing that. we'll just pretend we don't have that, we don't have access to it, and we'll just go with that. And as you can see, 0 days, bang, done. Confirm, just costs a little bit of money. Work orders complete. There you go. So just like that, you've got a mech that's gone from having flimsy armor and some pointless equipment in it to having pretty much full armor, just like that. Nice and easy, eh? So, yeah, you can do that with any of your other mechs as well. Anything that started with what you would deem to be equipment that's surplus to requirements, so you can just take it out. Another example here with the Stinger. Let's just go refit that. So it's 20-ton mech. Starts, as you can see, like nearly all mechs, they start with reduced armor levels, and I think that's risky business, particularly if you're talking about 20-ton mechs. They can't take many hits as it is. So a 20-ton mech with reduced armor is just craziness. So I'd immediately just rip out some jump jets, get that armor maxed out, see where we stand. Okay, so what I would do with this build, given the choice, if I could buy a couple of medium lasers, I'd chuck a couple of medium lasers in it, but let's assume we don't have that, or we don't have access to that. I would put these jump jets back in. Now, actually, that's worth pointing out. So if I put this jump jet back into a location where it wasn't previously, you'll see that will take me a day to fit, and then the more I put in, you'll see it's going up and up and up. If I put these jump jets back in exactly where I found them, it shouldn't take me any days. Now, hold on, where did that jump jet come from? Hold on, let me just refit that. Hold on, so stock combat right torso. Oh, it's probably getting confused over which jump jets came from where, isn't it? That'll be why it's being a pain. Let me just go back. There we go. Let's go refit again. All right. So yeah. So we're just going to rip out only as many jump jets as we need to get the armor sorted. So I want to get the armor maxed out in the head and on all front locations as a priority. So we've done that. Let's get the legs maxed out as well. We've done that. We've got a tiny little bit of tonnage left. So let's just go with that. So at the moment, the rear locations are still pretty dodgy, down at 15. But you know, assuming you could protect the rear, this is workable. Still got 4 jump jets, which gives you a max jump of 150 meters, which is pretty respectable, and a couple of medium lasers to start with. Now, obviously, I would replace these jump jets eventually with 2 more medium lasers, and I'll just go without the jump jets. But you know, if you like jumping and you'd rather have less firepower, you can just stick with this as it is. And there we go. Now you can see 0 days to fit that up. And again, bang, that's another mech sorted out right from the off. So you get the idea, right? So that's something you can do right at the start of the game, which doesn't cost you any time. Very important, because going into your first mission with terrible pilots and just stock mechs with stock armor levels when your stuff is as light as this can cost you. You know, this could go badly wrong if you're not thinking things through and you're not being careful about what you're doing. In the vanilla game, obviously, you start with a couple of mediums. You know, you start with some top-end light mechs, and so life's a lot easier in vanilla. And you might get a bit of a shock if you're coming to this mod playing it for the first time and just thinking, oh, I can just go out into the world and take these mechs. Well, I recommend not doing that. I recommend fixing them up a bit first. So yeah. That's definitely a thing to do. Now, what I would also say, let's have a look at the contracts we've got here, is, again, with vanilla, you'll find life easier. You might be used to biting off tougher missions right from the off, but I'd say don't take on missions that you can't handle too early. So, you know, you look at this and you go, right, you know, here are my options. I've got 2 half skulls, 2 1 skulls, and a 1.5 skull. Obviously, I'm not going to be starting with the 1.5 skull, knowing that all my stuff is terrible. My armor levels are generally quite bad. Well, even once I fix them, they're going to be fairly low, and my firepower is not great. So start with the half skull missions and just do them until you feel comfortable. If you're finding them too easy and you're not losing anything, everything's a breeze, yeah, then up yourself to the next ones. It might just be that by the time you've done these 2 half skulls, you could probably handle these 2 1 skulls, but I would probably take on this 1.5 skull mission after doing all of these, assuming I'm in a reasonable enough state to do that. But if you find that that's getting you smashed up, if you're in a mission and you're starting to lose pilots or mechs are getting absolutely wrecked, don't be afraid to just withdraw. Like, you know, nobody's measuring your penis here or whatever else you might want to measure. Just withdraw. Like, sometimes it's better to cut your losses than it is to absolutely ruin your playthrough by getting destroyed early on. It's sometimes not worth it. Now, I've played over 1,000 hours of this game, and I've played a lot of hours in this mod. I've had it since before it was released to the public, so I've put a lot of time into it, and I would probably have a crack at that. And I would assume that with the little tweaks I'd make to the mechs, I'd probably be all right at doing that. I know that, you know, even with the full lengths of 20-ton mechs, if I've got all those Stinger 3Gs in, I could definitely do 2.5 skull missions on occasions with just those, you know, once they're fitted out how I want. So I would have a crack at that and see how I manage it. Once you've done your first location, don't immediately go for somewhere high level. You don't necessarily have to take the travel contract that's offered. In this case, we don't have one, but you can just have a look around for somewhere else that's low level. So don't go straight to the 2 skulls. Don't even necessarily need to go straight for the 1 skulls. If you can find yourself a half skull that's close enough, then go for there. I'm just having a look around, and I'm not actually seeing a half skull that's particularly close, and I don't want to search for too long and bore you to tears, but you know, in the absence of a half skull, we'll go for a 1 skull, because in those locations you can find half skull missions still. There's a bit of leeway either side of the general system challenge level. So yeah, don't bite off more than you can chew, basically. The next thing is your pilots. So let's just have a quick look at pilots, because that's one of the things that makes life difficult early on. Is your pilots are terrible. They have poor gunnery. They don't have many hit points. Life is tough when you're like that, especially if you haven't got a lot of firepower as well. So what I would prioritize early on when building pilots, you can see with Timmy McTactics here, I've gone for stuff that's given me extra gunnery and extra guts for my character profile right from the off. Now, they are the 2 most important stats early on, in my opinion. Gunnery, I'd say that's a no-brainer, because the higher your gunnery, the more chance you've got of hitting your enemy. The more you hit your enemy, the quicker they die, and that's a good thing. But also guts, because getting knocked over causes pilot injuries, getting shot in the cockpit causes pilot injuries, getting side torso blown off causes pilot injuries. And once you've taken your maximum injuries, that pilot could die. So having guts early on, I think is important too. So I've obviously got my 4 points in gunnery, and I've got 3 points in guts, and you start with a little bit of XP. So what I would do personally with this XP, let me just show you. If I put both of those points in tactics, at best I'm getting -1 indirect fire penalty. Just a single point in tactics gets me absolutely nothing. Single point in piloting gets me a slightly improved melee base hit, which can be useful. You will sometimes be meleeing at this low level when you're fighting lights that might be building up lots of evasion. Actually running up and punching them can ignore that evasion and be very useful. But I could also buy a skill. Now, the only skill available to me at the moment is multi-target. Now, I might not want that. Personally, my favourite skill is Bulwark, which is here in the guts tree. So I'm going to buy a point of guts, which gets me +1 health. I think that's very useful early on. And then I can either sit on the other 900 and save up for Bulwark, or I can buy a point in piloting, so I've got a slightly better chance of punching something should I need to do that. But we'll go with this for now, because it won't take too long to save up for your first skill, which for me would be that. But what I generally do with my pilots is I'll focus on getting gunnery and guts to 4, and then after that you can start working towards whatever skills you might want for your pilot. And obviously each to their own on the skills. Everyone has their own different views on how to play, their own preferences of what skills to go for, whether it's multi-target breaching shot or bulwark and coolant vent or sensor lock. You know, there's all sorts of combos you can do, and it's up to you what you go for. But early on, I recommend getting gunnery to 4 and guts to 4, and then progressing beyond that. So we'll just confirm that. I'd also look for, you know, what you've got in your starting pilot. So this guy here, Heatsink, he's a really good starting pilot. This is a very lucky draw here as well. Already 4 points in guts and gunnery. I would definitely be using this guy from the off. And then after that, I'd go for the next best gunnery skill. So that would be Summit. I would take out in my first lance. She's got 3 gunnery, whereas my 2 remaining guys only have 2. So out of these 2, I would pick the one that's got the highest guts. So that means Ostrich is bottom of the pile, since she's only gunnery 2 and guts 3, whereas Barbican is gunnery 2 and guts 4, so he's a little bit more survivable. So, you know, my starting lineup pilots would be Doyle, Barbican, Heatsink, and Summit. And then I'd just use Ostrich, you know, if one of the others is injured and I need to keep doing missions. Another thing to do right at the start of the game is sort yourself out ship upgrades. So you start with a reasonable amount of money, and right at the beginning it is wise to buy yourself the repair scaffolding. What that does is that'll give you an extra 2 tech points, and that's crucial early on, because you're going to be, 1, taking loads of damage, so you'll end up doing repairs, and 2, you're going to be picking up weapons as you go along, and you'll want to, unless you're crazy and you just prefer to use stock mechs, you are going to want to refit your mech's weapons and get yourself better loadouts. And so anything you can do to shave time off your repair and refits is a good thing. So I would buy this right from the off. It's 270k to get, and it'll take 20 days to complete, so you're not going to have it immediately, but the sooner you get this, the better. So I would purchase that. Bang, done. And then after that, you'll see you need repaired power conduits to get the next one, and that will cost you 450,000. But honestly, I would really prioritize getting these combat and deployment stuff, the repair and refit section specifically. I'll get these things as quickly as you can, and as many of them as you can, because you will, as I said, be doing a lot of repairing and refitting. So once that's finished, you'll get the power system improved, so that you can eventually, you know, get this. So you get the repaired power conduits, and you're away. But yeah, so that's another thing worth noting for starting your game out. That will make your life a little bit easier, allow you to do things a little bit quicker. So again, I did mention the store earlier. That's something I would normally do right from the off as well. Now you can take or leave this advice, because you're going to pick up things like medium lasers from salvage anyway. But when I'm sitting on money and I'm feeling, you know, like I'm pretty comfortable for my finances, I can see here what my monthly expenses are, and it's 230,000. I'm going to earn that in the space of 1 mission. So I would actually buy up these 3 medium lasers here, because I like lasers at this level. We'll talk about that a little more in a moment. And then the other thing was, we needed an extra ton of ammo for the Irby, and as you can see, ammo everywhere there's a store that you can actually purchase stuff from, you will find ammo. So I would buy myself that extra ton of AC-10 ammo that I want for the urban mech, and I would get that fitted. Now, doing those refits, as I said, you can do the refits for 0 days, as I've already demonstrated, but things that are quick, such as throwing in an extra ton of ammo to the Irby, will take 1 day. I would do that before I even do the first mission, because then I've got an urban mech that's maxed out. You know, it's as good as it's getting. So we've already adjusted the armor, so let's just go and buy this AC-10 ammo quickly.
New equipment available.
And then we'll go to the mech bay, and we can refit this immediately. And just as I showed you, rip that out, drop the back armor a little, and we'll be away. We'll have enough room to fit it. I could take a little bit off that arm as well. Alright, so we've got 30 in the rear center, 25 on the torsos. I've dropped the empty left arm a little, and then we can afford to throw in that extra ton of ammo. Now, I can leave that and just have that take a day, or I could just move this as well, have it take 2 days, which isn't really much. You know, 2 days is what, nothing in the grand scheme of things, and put the ammo in the legs. Now, the reason I prefer ammo in the legs is statistically, out of all the locations where you can get hit when the enemy is shooting at you, aside from the head, you are least likely to get hit in the legs, assuming you're angling and positioning your mech well and not getting flanked. So the legs for me are the safest place to put ammo. Now, I'm sure there's going to be some of you out there that disagree and think putting it in the arms is great, but I would say no to that. It's not great because your arms get hit quite a lot. Your arms can get used for shielding, and if you've lost your ammo, then your gun is useless. Now, this is an arm weapon, and you could say, well, yeah, well, what's the harm in putting them in that arm? Because if that arm comes off, you've got no weapon anyway. Well, you know, there's 2 more things in the arm that could explode and get crit and cause you more damage, so I'd just rather not do that as well. We'll just go for legs. So it's my preference. I put my initial ammos and heat sinks and jump jets when I'm building a mech. It all goes in the legs first. After that, it goes in the side torsos. Yeah, that's just a safer way of doing it. And then, you know, you can use your arms. Often if they're empty, like we've got here, you can just use them as ablative armor. Like this left arm to me is just a shield. So if I've taken damage across the front of my mech and things are looking a bit nasty on the right side where my weapon is, and I want to protect that, then I'll just twist and I'll basically present this left arm to the enemy as a target and say, yeah, fine, shoot that off. It's not going to cost me anything other than a little bit of repairs. So yeah, there we go. That would take 2 days, so we can confirm that. We're not going to play this, but you know, we'll just pretend that we would, and there you go. So and I would do this for as many mechs as I can, really. Whatever I can buy from the store and fit into my mechs to make early improvements, I think is worth doing, even before you do that first mission, because once you're doing missions, you're taking damage, you're getting hurt, you've got the possibility of losing pilots. So give your pilots or yourself the best chance of getting through those first missions you possibly can. Don't go in half-cocked, you know, and get, well, be taking more damage than you need to. Go in, like for example with this 3G, like if I can just buy those 2 extra medium lasers and go in with 4 medium lasers instead of 2 on this mech, it's twice the firepower on this mech. I'm going to kill stuff twice as fast as I would have just going in with it as stock. That's worthwhile. You know, that means the enemy's dying faster than it would, and therefore I'm taking less damage and I'm not going to get in so much trouble. So yeah, just some little general advice points there. So another thing, just looking over my notes here, another thing worth mentioning about armor when you're, you know, sorting out the armor on your mechs. You may have noticed that I take armor from the rear. The reason for that being that as long as you're careful about your facing of your mechs and you don't rush in to melee range where mechs can just maneuver directly behind you very easily, as long as you keep your distance carefully, then you can afford to strip some rear armor away, because the damage you're taking should be all in your front or your sides at worst. So when I'm stripping armor to try to fit extra things in, I'll strip a little off the rear. I mean, these rear armor locations are way lower than I would personally like them to be. 25 is all right on the lights. Usually on a lot of my heavier mechs, I end up with like 50 on the side torsos and 55 on the center. And then after that, you can sometimes strip a little bit off the legs as well, because like I said, they don't get hit as often. But light mechs, their legs are pretty low armored anyway, and they rely a lot on their speed. So, you know, I'd try not to take too much off there or anything if you don't have to. But I always max out the front locations, always, and the arms as well. These are where you're getting shot. And you know, I see people that build mechs where they don't bother to increase the armor, or they have max armor in the rear and not quite max on the front, and all sorts of crazy things. It's, in my opinion, a bad idea. You want as much armor as possible give yourself as much protection as possible to the areas that are taking the damage, and then you can afford to take a little bit away from the areas that aren't taking the damage. So, you know, like I said, as long as you play carefully, your rears shouldn't be getting shot too much, if at all, and your legs will get shot slightly less than other things. You know, so for example, there are assault mechs that have like 210 armor on the legs, and you can afford to strip those down a little without it actually having any major impact on that mech's survivability, and that can often buy you extra weapons, extra heat sinks or jump jets, things like that, that are just going to make the mech more effective with its firepower. Okay, so another thing worth mentioning quickly is after you've done those initial upgrades to whatever mechs you're able to quickly before going into your first mission, once you've done some missions and you've got some equipment to actually fit into your mechs, I would tend to upgrade my mechs, you know, properly, like give them a build that I would see as being almost final, one at a time, while traveling between systems. So I've always got at least the 4 mechs that I can go into missions with while one is being worked on. And the way I pick which mech to work on first will generally be down to whichever needs the repairs first. So, you know, say for example, the fire starter gets banged up in a mission and needs repairing. I'll finish off the system with whatever I've got left, you know, to play with, and then when I travel to the next system, I'll prioritize repairing that fire starter, but at the same time I'll refit it into a build that I want, because by then, after doing a few missions, you've probably got some equipment that you can put in. I might have picked up some machine guns, I might have picked up some small lasers, I might have picked up some medium lasers, whatever, you know, that I can throw into the mech. And I think that's a good way of doing it, because then you're not just sitting in a system, you know, waiting on repairs and refits, doing nothing, wasting time and money. You're actually getting those refits done during your travel time, where you can't do missions anyway. So it's just good economy, let's say. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about lights in general, and what I think are good light mechs in this game for starting out with, because obviously when you start the game, most of what you're going to come up against will be vehicles or light mechs in the early stages, with the occasional medium thrown in there that you might have to deal with, but therefore most of the things that you're gonna be putting together from your salvage early on will also be light mechs. So it's worth knowing which are the good ones, which are the bad ones, what do you want to prioritize taking pieces off if you encounter them, and what don't you. But first of all, there are just some more general things worth mentioning about building light mechs, some general principles that I go for, and that is in terms of what weaponry, what weapon systems I think are important for lights. Now, obviously, there will be some exceptions to these rules, but we'll get to those. So, for me, I think medium lasers are one of the best weapon systems, well, in general, but particularly for light mechs, because they only weigh a ton. They're really light, and they're very effective in terms of the damage they do for the heat they cost. And you do come across quite a lot of them. They're pretty common weapons. So, when tonnage is an issue because your mech is light and it can't carry like an AC-20 or anything ridiculous and big like that, then you've got to go for these smaller, more efficient weapon systems, such as the medium lasers. Other weapon systems that I think are important for light mechs, in terms of their economy for damage versus heat and tonnage, are things like the large lasers. If you want something for long range, I would take large lasers again, because in terms of the longer range weapons, they are pretty much the lightest, I think, and they don't generate too much heat. I think a large laser is just 18 heat, if I remember rightly. We'll just double check there. Yep, there you go, 18 heat, and yeah, they're good long range, light, low heat, effective weapons. You compare that to a PPC. PPC's heavier, generates more heat. Granted, the PPC has the sensor impairment ability and the stability damage, but it's hard to run that on a light mech. just because it's so heavy and so hot. And same problem really in a way with ballistics, in that they're heavy. Now they're not as hot as PPC's ballistic systems, but they do require ammo. So trying to fit an AC-10 into a light mech, unless it's an Irby, you're going to have a really hard time. In fact, you're probably going to find it impossible. The Irby obviously is an exception to the rule, and the reason for it being an exception is its movement. It's so slow. Its engine is so small, it's so slow that's why you've got the room to be able to fit an AC-10 and a couple of tons of ammo in it. So, like I said, there are exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking, the energy systems are your friend with the light mechs. The other thing worth noting is I really like machine guns for light mechs as well. You might be a fan of small lasers, and if you like that, that's your thing, fair enough. But for me, machine guns are better for two reasons. One being that they don't generate heat. So that's a big deal on a light mech as well, because you don't have a lot of spare tonnage for tons and tons of heat sinks. So if you've got, say you've got a fire starter and you've got 3 medium lasers in it, I can afford to fit 6 machine guns in this fire starter and still have a decent heat efficiency. Now, if I was using small lasers instead of these machine guns, this heat efficiency would be absolutely appalling. So I think the machine guns are better for that reason. The other thing is, with this Battletech Extended 3025 mod, you can actually get improved machine guns as well. Whereas in vanilla, obviously they're the only weapon that doesn't have any improvement to them. So as you can see here, these are top level machine guns as I see them. You get plus 50% crit and an extra plus 2 damage, and that's per shot fired. Obviously they fire 5 shots doing 5 damage each. You can do the maths on that and understand that that's pretty damn good. So especially once you've got 6 of them. So yeah, I'm a big fan of machine guns because they're low heat. So when fitting out my lights, I will tend to build my designs around medium laser, machine guns, large laser combos. The only exceptions to that, as I said, are mechs that don't really have much in the way of energy slots, and therefore you're forced to use something else. So, for example, we've got the Urban Mech here, which you can fit an AC-10 in, as I covered already, and I think that's a fantastic weapon to have in a light mech early on in the game. If you start with one of these mechs, you're going to smash things up. Downside is you're going to find this mech's at the back of your formation a lot, playing catch up, but once you do catch up, it does a lot of damage. The other one to look at is the Javelin. The Javelin obviously is completely without any other slots other than missile hardpoints, and therefore you have to go with something else. And the best you can do, in my opinion, with a Javelin is fit a couple of SRM6s in it. And yeah, it's nice. A lot of people like that damage, but it's not very pinpoint. It is heavy hitting, but the downside of having to use missile systems in light mechs again is the ammo. Now, machine guns, I've mentioned, you might be thinking, well, you said machine guns are great and they take ammo. They don't take much ammo. Like 1 ton of machine gun ammo can basically keep a lot of machine guns going. For the amount of use you get out of them, it goes a long way. Whereas the SRM ammo, you pretty much per SRM6 you need 1 ton of ammo, in my opinion. That's the benchmark I go for. So you've got your SRM6s weighing 3 tons each here, and for each one of those I have to spend an extra ton in ammo. Now it's just my personal view, but again, when you've not got much in the way of tonnage to play with, you've got light mechs, you can't fit in heat sinks or anything like that. As you can see in this 30-ton mech here, to take 2 SRM6s and 2 tons of ammo, I can't fit anything else at all. And we'll just go to the refit page so you can see what I've done to be able to fit this. I've had to halve the armor on each of the arms. I've kept the legs on max, and the rear 30 on each side and 25 in the center. That's pretty drastic reductions just to fit 2 SRM6s in and the 2 tons of ammo. So obviously, if you want, you could reduce these. You could drop them down to SRM4s, for example, and have more armor, but then you've got even weaker firepower. And you know, I just don't think it's worth making this weaker than it is already. The stock version, of course, comes with 2 SRM6s as well, but the armor levels aren't so good, so I refit the armor levels differently. So rather than having weak front locations, I've gone for weak arms, because yeah, you might end up having to replace these arms after missions, which can get a little bit annoying, but it doesn't cost too much, and rather replace empty arms and not lose equipment and have them for shielding than have to be replacing weapon systems, you know. So that's that there. Okay, other general things I'll just quickly mention before I start going into these builds specifically and talking about those are when you're using light mechs. Light mechs are fast, so you want to try to make as much use of evasion as you possibly can, which means moving as far as you can afford to move before shooting each turn. But I also recommend using whatever cover you can. So try to move as far as you can, but from one piece of cover to another piece of cover. So you're getting the damage reduction for being in cover, and you're getting the evasion for moving quite far, which reduces the enemy chances to hit. And you want to be doing that as much as possible, because again, that will up your survivability, and anything you can do with light mechs to up your survivability is important, and you must do it at all times, particularly if you're stuck using 20-ton mechs. You know, it doesn't take many hits on a 20-tonner before somewhere on your mech is very vulnerable to just falling off, and you know, you're in a whole world of trouble if your light mechs start falling apart. Your pilots might end up dying. You know, anytime a pilot goes out injured, it could be a dead pilot. So yeah, you want to avoid taking the damage as much as possible. Another thing to do is rotate your mechs around. So when the AI is shooting at you, they will generally try to shoot the most what's the right word for it? The most viable target, let's say. So somebody that's out front or not in cover, you know, anything like that, they'll go for that mech. If all your mechs are in cover and your guy at the front will still end up being shot, the next phase, try to rotate things so that mech's not at the front, and you take the next volley of fire from the AI forces on a different mech that's fresh, and then rotate that guy and have a different guy on the front the next phase. So that's what I mean by rotating, and just spread that damage across all of your mechs. Don't be tempted to go, oh, this guy is my tank, he will be at the front, or she will be at the front, and take all the damage. You don't want to do that, because that mech, no matter how good they might be at tanking, whether it's like your heaviest mech, which might be only a 40-tonner when you're starting out, it's still not got much armor. Even if they've got the bulwark skill, it's, you know, it's only an extra 20% damage reduction. So at best, you're getting a 60% damage reduction if you're in cover, braced, and you've got bulwark. But you know, if you're tanking every turn against the AI forces, eventually that mech will be worn down to the point that it's going to get trashed. So if you're spreading it out amongst all of your pilots, spreading that damage, your armor goes a lot further that way. You will hold on to your weapon systems across all mechs for longer, and you will be able to grind down the enemy. And then, of course, you know, the best way of taking down the enemy is focus your fire. So you pick a target, you say, that guy's going to die, I'm going to focus all my energy into shooting that until it dies, and then you move on to the next target and the next target. And generally, you know, you want to pick on whatever's potentially going to hurt you the most, and take those targets out first. Sometimes it's worth saying, well, you know, the enemy's got a lot of stuff, this and this are quick kills if I go for them, because they don't have much armor, and then the enemy's got less stuff. Sometimes you'll want to go for quick kills, but it's up to you to make your own minds up strategically on a situational basis what you think is the most viable target. But yeah, spreading your armor out, you know, spreading the damage across all of the armor on all of your mechs, good idea, generally speaking. Okay. So another thing worth mentioning, if you manage to get your hands on these things, and in the early game, you're not always going to see this stuff, but sometimes you might, If you can get yourself a comm system, a good comm system for extra generation of resolve, that can be useful, because being able to use the skills such as precision strike and vigilance can be handy. Now, early on in the game, precision strike's not so useful because your pilots won't have cooled shot bonus or cooled shot mastery. They need to get to 9 points in the tactics skill to get cooled shot mastery. So eventually that's an amazing skill, but early on, vigilance is more important, and vigilance will allow you to basically get the same protection equivalent of being braced, but also allow you to shoot, and that can be very handy to allow whoever's at the front line tanking to also be able to shoot. So any extra resolve you can get is a good thing. Another thing worth picking up is the rangefinders. To give yourself the extra view distance, even if early on it's just a 25 meter one. If you can get that put into the cockpit of one of your mechs, that's going to be really helpful, particularly if you've got a long range element to your lance. And early on in the game, it is possible to start with the urban mech, it's possible to start with the Panther 9R, and both of those mechs are fantastic for their class at the long range game, and that can often allow you to take on bigger and scarier things than you otherwise would by kiting and using your mobility to keep things at range and stay out of their view so they can't see you. You know, you can have something that's got the rangefinder spotting for you up front, say for example spotting a Hunchback 3G. A Hunchback 3G is deadly to light mechs and light mediums. It's packing an AC-20 that can just obliterate you, no problem. So what do you want to do when you're fighting that? You want to stay well away from it and don't let it ever fire that AC-20 if you can help it. So the way to do that is a combination of either sensor lock or a rangefinder or both. Scout it, get it in view, and get your long range stuff in a position to shoot it and never get shot back, and just whittle it down by kiting and keeping your distance. Now you might have a couple of other mechs that are shorter ranged, that you might be thinking, well, they're sitting out the fight, they can't do anything while I'm just spotting with one mech and shooting long range with another. But honestly, it's worth keeping them out the fight if it means they're going to live. You know, as soon as you throw them in there and allow that AC-20 the opportunity to splat something, it probably will. So, you know, you'll only have yourself to blame if you go, oh, screw it, I want to use these, it'll be fine. And then that AC-20 just explodes your CT on a mech immediately, and that's a pilot gone. That's more costly than your time of dragging the fight out a bit longer by keeping two mechs out of the way. And what I would do is I would wait until later on, and you've had time to whittle down the Hunchback 3G with your long range firepower. Once it's like got some chord locations and it's about to go, or you've got a chance of knocking out that AC-20 torso, it's in the right torso, then I would move in the shorter range mechs and just go in for that kill, particularly if you've got something like machine guns. You try and get those crits in the torso and just get that ripped off. But anyway, you know, it's an example of why the rangefinder can be useful early on, giving you a greater spotting distance than the enemy and allowing you to play the ranged game, stay out of reach of them, kite with your fast lights and just, you know, hurt them while they can't hurt you. Good way of playing. Right, now let's have a look. Oh, hold on. No, there's one more thing. Sorry, there's one more thing. Lunar Environments. I think they're worth mentioning because Lunar Environments obviously don't have any cover. Another issue with them is it's really hard to lose heat in Lunar Environments. And light mechs, as I've said before, they don't fit many heat sinks. So you're not going to have a good ability to lose heat in spite of an environment. With light mechs. There are hardly any light mech builds that come packing loads of heat sinks. So I would tend to try to avoid Lunar Environments. And you can see what places will have Lunar Environments by just reading the information. So for example, this place we're in here, that's Arctic world. So, you know, that's great because that means cold environments, and that's good news when you're playing the early game. But there will be places that you can look at. You just read these attributes here. You can see here this place, desert world and moons. So I would probably want to avoid here if there's an option to go somewhere that's not got those environments at the same difficulty level. Then I would choose those places over this because desert worlds are hot and moons means possible lunar environment missions. And yeah, so I think it's good to avoid those because of the the problems with losing heat once you build it up with lights, but also because there's no cover as well. And lights, if you obviously you're going to be using your speed to build up evasion points to try to avoid getting shot in the first place, but if you are getting shot, you want the damage to be reduced as well. So I like to use cover too, and in an environment where there's no cover, it's not an option, is it? So I would recommend avoiding those environments early on, and unless you're super cocky and confident. Obviously, you know, a fair number of us by this point of the game's life have played this game a lot, and we're all pretty good and comfortable with it, and we know what we're doing. But if you're fairly new to it, or new to this mod, or you consider yourself to be a player of just average ability or whatever, then avoid those environments. Life will be a lot easier if you're fighting in a forest or a polar environment with some trees, you know, those kind of things. A lot easier to deal with. Okay, so now let's start looking at the mechs. What I've done here is I've picked out some mechs that, one, you can be fairly likely to pick up early on, or you might even start with, and two, are pretty good in their way. And I've done what I would consider the optimum builds for these, in my opinion. Now, there are many different ways of playing this game. There are no right or wrong ways, and that's one of the awesome things about Battletech, is it's such a flexible game. You can do what you want, but this is for people that might be short of ideas, might not know what's working, or might be doing things that aren't working out for them, and you can just look at what I'm doing, and I can tell you, you know, you play this stuff, this generally works, you know, most of the time. So we'll start with the Locust 3V. Now, nobody really wants a Locust, but if you have to have a Locust, if you absolutely have to deal with having a Locust, this is the one that I would recommend. And the reason being that it's got the 2 energy hardpoints in the center torso, which means to fit this, I've stripped the back armor down a little, so from 25 to 20 on the side torsos, and from 30 to 25 on the rear, and then just 5 points off each arm, so from 30 down to 25, and that allows me to fit 2 medium lasers. Now, of course, it does have support weapon hardpoints. It's got 3, so I could go with small lasers or machine guns or whatever if I wanted with this mech, but you can't fit many weapons in a 20-tonner, and I think if all you can fit is 2 tons worth of weapons, I would recommend making those 2 tons worth of weapons medium lasers. The reason being that the medium lasers are better than the support weapons because they've got more reach. And keeping your distance from the enemy is a good thing. Now, some might argue that, well, the support weapons are great because when you're fighting against stuff that's got loads of evasion, support weapons have a much higher chance to hit, and that's really good. And you're not wrong; it is really good. Support weapons having a higher chance to hit is a fantastic thing against stuff with loads of evasion. But it also means that the enemy are going to be in range to punch you. And therefore your evasion is also going to count for very little or nothing. If you're close enough to fire support weapons at an enemy, they're close enough to fire theirs at you. They're also close enough to run up and punch you, and that, in my opinion, in 20-ton mechs is risky business. So I would rather be kiting around, moving as far as I can, keeping my optimum medium laser range, and firing 2 medium lasers a turn with this than I would, you know, running in and trying to fire small lasers instead. And once, as I've recommended earlier, getting 4 points in gunnery. Once your gunnery skills up to a certain point and you keep yourself over 50% resolve to get the accuracy bonus for your pilots during a mission, then you know you're gonna hit enough. You can live without having to rely on support weapons to cause hits. And in cases where the enemy does build up loads of evasion, well, send your biggest, toughest mech in to punch them instead. And you know you'll hit them just fine. So here we go. I recommend with this mech the 2 medium lasers, and I would say it's the best of the Locusts because a lot of the other Locust variants you have to put weapons in the arms, and those arms get shot and they come off very easily, whereas this one, they're as well protected as they can possibly be, behind 60 points of armor from the front on the center torso. It doesn't get better than that on a Locust. So these weapon systems are safe, and you've got all this extra armor on the side torsos and the arms that can be used to shield and protect yourself and twist towards the enemy if you start taking too much damage. So yeah, 2 medium lasers is all that's required here. Obviously, this save where I've picked out these mechs is one that I've had going for a long time, so you might notice I've got like plus 10 damage medium lasers in here. If you have the luxury of finding these are the best medium lasers in my opinion later on in the game, because the extra damage is great, but earlier on you might find even just these to be good with the plus accuracy. So here's just plus 3 accuracy or plus 1 accuracy, 25 crit, plus 3 accuracy, 50 crit. So if you can find any of those improved ones with the extra accuracy, they can be useful too, because obviously early on in the game your pilots aren't good at shooting straight. So anything you can do to improve that is good. But personally, for me, later on, the plus damage becomes the king, because once your gunnery skill is over a certain level, hitting things is not so much of a problem. You just want to max out your damage. So anyway, there we go. There's the Locust, and that's the 3V. I think that's the best Locust. Now, after the best Locust, we've got another common mech. The Stingers are very common. You will encounter plenty of these, and the 3G, in my opinion, is the best Stinger. We looked at it briefly earlier on, as it was one of the mechs I rolled as a starting mech. When I was showing you the start you can get, but this is the build I was talking about. This is what I would say is the optimum build for this 20 tonner, and I think this 20 tonner is awesome for what it is. 4 medium lasers, and just strip again the rear and rear sides and rear center down a little bit. I've actually taken 1 point of armor off the leg as well there. You can take that off somewhere else if you want, but the legs get hit less, so I've gone for that, and that allows me to fit in 4 medium lasers, and that is the best 20-ton mech in the game that I've encountered so far. Now, I do say that I've encountered so far, because the way this works is that this mod is law compliant, so some variants are super rare, and you might never see them, or it will take you many hours to see them. So I'm working with mechs that are common enough that you're either going to start with them or you're going to find them early on in the game. Most of these that I will be showing you are not super rare, and again, the 3Gs, they show up pretty often, so that it's very realistic that you could get yourself 1 or 2 of these in the early stages of the game, depending on how many points how many pieces you're playing for salvaging mechs. But if you're only playing like 3 pieces of salvage or 4, you're going to get yourself a couple of these pretty easy. They're pretty common. But yeah, 4 medium lasers in a 20 tonner. What more could you ask for? Right, then we've got another very common Stinger, the 3R. You will see plenty of these in the early game as well. And for this is where I like to bring in some machine guns to play, because you can fit a couple of medium lasers in this. Good solid start for a light mech, for a 20 tonner. But also, I can fit 3 machine guns as well, and half a ton of ammo. Again, the half ton of ammo for machine guns is another thing that this mod adds. But yeah, as you can see, similar thing with the armor level, almost identical thing with the armor levels, and instead of those 2 medium lasers to bring it up to 4, this doesn't have the energy slots for that, so I give it 3 machine guns instead. And this build can be useful. You know, it's not a bad thing to have a mech that can have some support weapons and ignore high evasion targets, you know, evasiveness. You can get right up to them and just go, well, dodge the machine guns and just wreck them. So I think it's a decent build to have in your mix, and it's still got those 2 medium lasers for you know, kiting around and blasting things from mid-range without having to go in too close. I tend to save these machine guns for going in for the kill on things, or getting into the rear arc, or like I said, you know, shooting locusts that have built up loads of evasion and my other pilots are struggling to hit. Of course, worth noting, support weapons also fire when you go for melee attacks as well, so works well with that. Another thing is the Wasp 1A is fairly common, and again, you saw we started with a Wasp 1A in the career I demonstrated earlier for the starting mechs, and yeah, you will come across plenty of these. This is the build that I would go for with the Wasp 1A, and you might notice I haven't used jump jets particularly so far on the other mechs, because I've gone for more firepower as my priority. I think firepower is important. The faster you kill stuff, the better. the less time they have to kill you. But there are certain mechs that suit jump jets rather well, and this is one of them because I don't really want to put any other weapons in this. It's only got 2 energy slots, 1 support weapon slot. So I'm quite happy to just go with 2 medium lasers. I'm perfectly heat efficient, so after that I'll use my spare tonnage on jump jets, and that works out nicely. It gives me a mech that I can use to every now and then, hop over the enemy and start shooting them in the rear. Granted, it's only with 2 medium lasers, but we are talking about early stages of the game, so we're generally shooting things that don't have a lot of armor, so that can be quite devastating to the rear of a light mech, for example. So yeah, these 2, I've got 4 jump jets in total in this mech. That allows a max jump of 150 meters. Obviously I could fit 6 in this, but if I do that, I'm only going to have 1 medium laser, or I'm going to have hardly any armor, and I think that's silly. So I'd rather just go with 4. 150 meter jump is far enough to hop over things, when you're in combat. So that'll do, and I still get to keep good firepower. Again, on this, instead of taking that 1 point off the leg, I've taken that extra point off the arm, because this is, of course, an empty arm and is therefore usable as a shield. And you're not going to lose anything if it comes off. So I've still got the same amount reduced on the rear, and then just a little bit off that left arm. So they are 20-ton mechs we've just looked at there. 4 very usable and decent 20-tonners. What we've got here is another 20-tonner. This is the Flea 4. Now, this is a little bit rarer than the other mechs. A little bit different. This row here are mechs that are what I consider kind of also decent, if not the best. This bottom row here are things that I would say, if I was to take a lance out of the best light mechs, then that we'll get to that. But these are mechs that are also okay, also worth having a look at. But this Flea in particular out of these is not as common as the others. But let's just have a quick look at it, because this is an interesting 20-ton mech. If you do manage to get your hands on one of these, you might notice it's a little bit under tonnage, because it's actually really hard to get this to the right amount of tonnage, unless I was to go with machine guns, which is one way of doing it. But what I've done with this one is instead of machine guns, I've gone for small lasers. As you can see, the heat efficiency is great, and small lasers, particularly with the damage bonus ones, are actually a little bit more powerful than machine guns in terms of just overall total damage output. Now, this has got a maximum damage of 185 when considering all the improved damage that I've got. It's got a single energy hardpoint, which I've obviously put a medium laser in, and then 5 support weapon hardpoints. So this, it's even described as recon and backstabber. It's pretty much what it says, isn't it? Like, you use it for scouting and then flanking around the enemy and then shooting them in the rear. And if you can get in with this firepower into the rear arc of something, that's pretty deadly. Now, obviously, you don't want to be doing this against bigger, heavier mechs later on in the game. That's a bit crazy, but doing it against mechs of an equivalent tonnage, light category, let's say, that works rather well, and it's just an interesting build that I thought, you can build one of these for fun and have a crack with. I'm not going to say it's the best thing. I prefer to rely on longer range weapons than just support weapons, but if you do manage to get one of these, this is something you can do with it, and you will find you can actually have a lot of fun blasting things with very short range firepower. It's a lot of firepower for a 20-ton mech. Again, I think this is the hardest hitting 20-ton mech. So the 3G I think is great. It's 4 medium lasers, fantastic firepower, 140 on a 20-tonner. But as you see, this Flea was up at 185. Mental. But as I said, it's a lot rarer. You're less likely to encounter it, but if you do and you like hitting things hard from close range, then it's a possibility. Another one to look at, the Commando 2D. Now, there is another Commando, I think it's the 1B, that I think personally is the best Commando. But it's really rare. You are unlikely to see it in this. You'll see plenty of them in vanilla, but in Battletech Extended 3025, it's a lot rarer. So I've not even built one of those because I still don't even own one on this. And this career, I'd played like over 5,000 days of it before I even set up these mechs for doing some YouTube videos. So if I've not managed to find one in that amount of time, you can imagine you don't see that many of them. The 2D, on the other hand, they're relatively common. You see enough of the 2D. The 2D pack in 1 energy hard point, 3 missile hard points, and a support hard point. So let's have a look at what I've done with the 2D. So this, you'll see it's looking a little threadbare. Now, most people will make missile builds out of this, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. It can work. They can be pretty hard hitting. But what I've gone for here is, this is like, if you can't find yourself a Panther or an Irby to use as a long range mech, but you want a long range mech in your light lance, this commando variant can work for that. I've given it a large laser and a small laser just for backup if things get close, but that single large laser you can use for kiting and picking off mechs gradually. Obviously the Panther or the Irby will do a better, harder hitting job for long range, but we are talking here about a mech that's you know, if you can't get one of those, what else can you use? What can you make do with? This is something that can do it, and it's a fairly common variant to come across. So we don't need to spend too much time on that. Again, we've mentioned the Irby. This is a mech you can start the game with. The 2D as well, you can start the game with that. But yeah, the Irby, we'll just have a quick look at this because I already pretty much showed you early on. But there you go. AC-10, 2 tons of ammo, strip the armor a bit, bang, done. Irby. And that's a hard-hitting long-range mech. The downside, as we've said already, is it's slow. But if you can use the rest of your force to kite the enemy into the line of sight of the Irby, sitting up somewhere high, it can be devastating to enemy lights and vehicles. The early game, an Irby is it's almost like the Atlas of the early game. It's big, it's scary, it hits really hard, but it's mega slow. Okay, next we've got the Javelin, another mech we can start off with, and we already had a look at this, so I'm not going to even click through to that, but as you can see, 2 SRM6s, 2 tons of ammo, and I would say that's about the best thing you can do with a Javelin. Another way of building that is, of course, you can split these down if you've got other missile weapons, so you could perhaps go with 2 4s and 2 2s, and that gives you a bit more flexibility for turning weapons on or off, and therefore you can manage your heat a little better. But as you can see, the heat efficiency it's just fine. It's just fine as it is, so you don't really need to do that unless you're fighting hot environments. But it does have 4 hard points, so whatever you can do to make it up to a total of 12, however you need to go about that, then you know it will be the same. Like, you know, a 2 plus a 4 is the same in tonnage and heat as a single 6. It all works out mathematically, so however you want to do it. Right, then we've got the Jenna D. Let's have a quick look at this. So you may have seen me, if you watch my my Twitch streams or whatever, you may have seen me using a Jenna more recently, and I went for a different build with it just for fun. I went for a jump jetting Jenna, which means having 1 less laser. However, this is how I would normally build a Jenna, where you know, I don't really need or want jump jets. I would go with this. So 4 medium lasers, a single heatsink, bang, done. That's it. You just reduce a bit of armor off the rear as usual, and a tiny little bit off each leg, so just 1 click down on each leg, and that's a done mech. So for a 35 tonner, it's still very fast, so you're never going to fit as much firepower into this 35 tonner as you will, say, a Panther or a Firestarter, but 4 medium lasers is okay, and you know, it makes for a good fast scouting mech with a reasonable amount of firepower and a decent heat efficiency. It's just, you know, when I look at this Jenna and I think to myself, well, I can fit 4 medium lasers in a Stinger, in a 20 ton Stinger 3G. I can have the same amount of firepower. It kind of makes the Jenna look not as good. But let's go on to the mechs that I think are the best in class for the light category. We'll start with the Panther. Now, unfortunately, I only have one Panther. Otherwise, I would have had two of these, and I'd just shown two different ways of building the Panther that I really like. But instead, I'll just have to talk about the other one and show you this one. So, what I've done with this, I've kitted this out with the best stuff that I can. So it's got 2 plus 10 damage, plus 3 accuracy, large lasers. It's got plus 3 resolve comm system. It's got a minus 30% stability damage gyro. So again, be aware that this equipment is like more like end game equipment, but I had it, so I've shoved it in anyway. This is like a very good build for lights, for long range lights. Now, the stock version of a Panther starts off with a PPC and an SRM4 in the center torso. Now, my preference is these 2 large lasers, because 2 large lasers is going to output more long range damage than a single PPC. It's nowhere near as hot, and it means I can, you know, up all my armor as I would normally do, and again just strip the back down a tiny little bit off that arm. I can still fit in 4 jump jets, which is the maximum amount of jump jets for a Panther. So this is very mobile, light sniper, and I think that's awesome for what it is and what it does. And I highly recommend this mech. If you start with one, you're very lucky. If you can get your hands on one, awesome. Unfortunately, if you don't start with one, they don't seem to be massively common, not in my experience anyhow, but if you can get hold of it, I think it's one of the best in class. 35-ton light mech, sniper extraordinaire. So yeah, keep your eyes out for these if you want a light lance that's awesome early on. And on to the next. I was going to say what I'd do with that if I had a second one. Another way of building it is you can go with a single large laser and replace that large laser there with I think it's 3 medium lasers and then a couple of extra heat sinks, and then you've got more of a mid-range focused Panther that can still do a little bit of damage at the long range. I in fact think this fire starter here, I've done pretty much that kind of build in. So you can see what I'm on about, but on the Panther it would all be in one arm. So what we've got here, single large, 3 mediums, and this I've shoved in a rangefinder. The Panther I think you could afford to fit in some heat sinks, but the fire starter is slightly different. But yeah, rangefinder, as we mentioned earlier, very useful. And that's decent kind of mid-range. Now, that's by no means the best thing you can do with a fire starter, in my opinion, though. That's just kind of showing you what I would have as a Panther instead if I could get one. The reason I've ended up with 3 fire starters here and only 1 Panther is because the Panthers are less common. Fire starters you see a lot of. They're pretty common in the early game and in this mod in general. So you're going to end up being able to get hold of either the FS9Hs or the FS9Ks, and you can do this build in either of them. Yeah, you're gonna have plenty of options of what to do with these mechs because they have a lot of decent hard points to them. But let's skip straight to what I love in this mech. I absolutely love this. This is my favourite light mech build ever. Like there's nothing so far that I've built in a light that I like more than this. 3 medium lasers and 6 machine guns, and we've got just a single ton of machine gun ammo. But that will see you through most of your missions. I mean, I can't remember the last time I ran out of machine gun ammo in this, but it hits so hard. I mean, it's got the improved weaponry in, so I'm getting extra damage bonus, but with the improved weaponry, that's a max of 290 damage. Absolutely disgusting amount of damage for a 35-ton mech. And of course, the way to use it is you want to flank around stuff, get in behind, and let rip with these machine guns. And this can take down heavies and assaults if you get in the rear arc. If you have a pair of these, my God, you know you can get a lot done with a pair of these. Just ripping stuff open and critting their internals and just destroying stuff. Absolutely brilliant mech. Decent heat efficiency. You can keep firing those 3 medium lasers pretty efficiently for quite a long time if you're kiting around, just waiting for your opportunity. But once you move in with these machine guns, that's when you're really doing the big damage. And if you've never tried this, just try it, and I'm sure you'll see why I love it so much. It's so much fun just watching all that DACA. Okay, then we've got 2 of these basically, because I think using a pair of those mechs is really good. So I would go with a pair of these, as I mentioned, just having them work together, get around the back of stuff, and you can take on much higher level things. If you've got 2 of these in the light lance and a couple of panthers, or in my case a substitute panther, you can take on so much stuff, so much higher level stuff with this unit, this lance, of 35 ton mechs. 3 skull missions aren't even a problem with these, as long as you're a decent player. But I recommend giving them a try, and particularly those machine gun fire starters. And as I said, because they're so common, you're not actually going to struggle to put enough of these together, find them, and make use of them. I really recommend it. Okay, so we're on a different screen now, showing the pools of mechs visibly, so you can see them. So we've looked at a starting game where we just rolled and saw what we had right from the beginning. We've looked at my kind of optimal builds when you've got the luxury of choice and you've played a bit, gone through what I would say are the best things you can get your hands on. But let's just have a quick look at the mechs in their little pools of what you can get and what I would do with these. So as I said before, you get 2 rolls on the 20-ton pool, and in that pool you've got the Locust 1E, the Locust 3V, the Wasp 1A, Stinger 3R, and the Stinger 3G. So we've already looked at what we would do with these mechs. You'll notice these ones, because these are built as starting mechs, they just have standard equipment in, so you can see normal levels of gear. We've already looked at the 3G Stinger and the Stinger 3R as well, so we don't need to focus on that. Same again for the Wasp 1A. I showed you the Locust 3V, but the other one that you can get is the Locust 1E, so we didn't see that. And this is what I would do if I happen to have rolled one of these. Again, very simple, just 2 medium lasers, but rather than the energy slots being in the center torso like the 3V, the 1E has them in the arms, and therefore they're more likely to get shot off. But that's what I'd go with if I was stuck with one of these Locusts early on. Pretty straightforward. So you're going to end up with 2 out of that pool, and we've already seen all the possible things you can do with those. We've looked at the fire starter. The next pool is the fire starter, the FS9H, the Jenner 7D, and the Javelin 10N. These are all possible, so you're going to get 1 of these. So we looked at the fire starter, best build in my opinion, the machine guns and 3 medium lasers. You can of course drop a medium laser if you like and replace that with a couple of jump jets, or drop some machine guns and get jump jets. You do you. If you like jump jets and less firepower, do that, feel free. But my preference is loads and loads of damage. You can see on this one I've actually fit an extra half ton of machine gun ammo into this particular build, whereas the other one I think I just had a single ton, but you can see there that all fits in. Jenna D, we looked at that, so 4 medium lasers, straightforward. Nothing complex there. 4 medium lasers, single heatsink. Javelin. Now you can see what I was talking about earlier on with the other Javelin. You can actually see the breakdown here. I've just done this as a 2 and a 4 in each side instead of 2 6s. And again, in the hotter environments like a lunar or a desert, if you happen to have no choice but to do those, it gives you a little bit more flexibility this way, in that I could switch a single 2 off and fire 2 4s and a 2, or switch 2 2s off and fire 2 4s, or whatever. It's a bit more flexible than if you've just plainly got 2 6s in. So I would go with this if you have the luxury of choice, just in case for hot environments. But as I already showed, heat efficiency is really good anyway, so it is literally only ever an issue after a sustained fight in a hot environment. But that is what I would do with the Javelin. So the next pool of mechs, you can roll from a Panther 9R, a Commando 2D, or the Irby R60. And we've already looked at those as well. So the two medium lasers and the jump jets in the Panther, the Irby with the AC-10, and then there's a Commando 2D. This is a different build, so we will look at this. And this is something else that you can do. And again, if I've got another longer range mech, or I'm not really fussed about having long range and I prefer short range stuff, this is another thing that can be done with the Commando 2D that I think is a fairly effective build for what it is. And that's a couple of SRM4s, only 1 ton of ammo though, so it could run out eventually, and a single medium laser. It might not sound like much or look like much, but you know, it's all right. You know, total amount of firepower is 89, which is pretty respectable for a 25-ton mech. But out of this pool, personally, I would probably go for the single large laser, because this is what I would see as the long-range pool. And if I've not rolled a Panther and I've not rolled an Irby and I'm stuck with the Commando, then I don't have any mech that's long-ranged out of my other stuff, so I'd probably make the Commando it. But that's just to show you an alternative of what can be done aside from the build I've already shown you. And then the final category is the Spider 5V, the Cicada 2A, and the Vulcan 2T. Okay, interesting category. The Spider, pretty straightforward. I'm sure we all know what can be done and can't be done with the Spider. I've gone for just 2 medium lasers here and stripped the armor down a bit. Done. Medium lasers in the center torso. Some of you might prefer to go with less armor and more jump jets or whatever. You know, like I said, you do you. But for me, firepower is more important than jumping about or reducing your armor, which I think is crazy, especially early on. So yeah. Just 2 medium lasers is what I'd stick in a Spider if that's what I got. Now, here we go. I've been waiting for this. The Cicada 2A. If you roll this mech, I am so sorry. Like, you are really unlucky. This mech absolutely sucks. It's the worst thing you could possibly start with. I would take any of the 20-tonners over this. Reason being, look at these armor levels. The armor levels end up being lower than a 20-tonner. Like, all of the 20-tonners can fit a couple of medium lasers in at a minimum. And if you put in 2 medium lasers to a Cicada, your armor levels end up being lower than a 20-ton mech. This is trash. It's the worst. If I rolled this out of my 5 mechs, this would be the one that I would just leave in the mech bay and not use unless I absolutely had to. So it's in there. It's a common mech. That's why it's in there. This is a law compliant mod. So, you know, that's why it's there. And it's kind of like a booby prize. You don't want this. But if you absolutely have to do something with it and your other mechs are out of action or whatever and you have to use it, this is what I would do with it. It's not good, but it is what it is. So yeah, there's a Cicada 2A, and commiserations if you get one. The Vulcan 2T, on the other hand, I've heard people complaining about the Vulcan 2T and saying how awful it is. Now, if you're trying to use it as a stock mech, then yeah, it's pretty awful, because its stock loadout is designed to be an anti-infantry mech in a game where there is no infantry. So yeah, there's its stock loadout. Medium laser, machine gun, flamer, AC2. I mean, it's pretty much a rainbow mech. The only thing it's missing is some kind of missiles, but it's got one of almost everything. But it's terrible, all of it, absolutely terrible. Low levels of armor, jump jets, blah blah blah. Whatever, leave that behind and rebuild it immediately. And what I would rebuild it to personally is this. This, in my opinion, is a very effective long-range mech. It's fast for a medium, as you can see here. That is fast. It's obviously it's only 40 tons, but if you max out its front armor, it's actually pretty respectable Like, bear in mind, this is a starting mech. This is a mech you can roll, and as you saw right at the start, it's a mech we rolled when I set one up just to see, oh, what have we rolled? We got one of these. So I stripped the legs down a bit. I stripped this left arm, this empty left arm a bit. The rear is pretty low. But once I've done all of that, it allows me to fit 2 large lasers in it, using up both energy hardpoints. Because that's another problem with this mech, is it's got 2 ballistic hardpoints that you basically can't really use because it's only a 40-ton mech with a big engine. It's just not space to use the ballistics. So just discount those, pretend they don't even exist. After that, it's got 2 energy hardpoints and 3 support weapon hardpoints. Now, you could go a couple of medium lasers and 3 machine guns. It's not exactly powerful, but you could then use this as a melee mech in the early stage of the game. 45 damage melee attack, could be worse. When it's fighting mostly lights, it's all right, I suppose. But my personal preference is to go with 2 large lasers like this, because then even once you're getting heavier stuff, once you're into the medium category, this mech is still kind of usable, you know. It's like a Panther in a lot of ways, and again, if you've not been lucky enough to roll the Panther and have yourself a nice jump jetting 2 large laser sniper mech to play with, well then you can use this instead. It can't jump, but it can move pretty far, and it's got slightly better armor. So and honestly, if I had this and a Panther, I would probably go with this and a couple of 5 starters if I had the option early on in the game. It's a very achievable goal, that, and you've got a very effective early game lance there. Couple long range for kiting and sniping, and a couple of brawlers, you know, with machine guns and medium lasers. But yeah, so Vulcan, don't write it off. It's actually decent for a 40-ton mech, and I would happily take the Vulcan over the Spider 5V or the Cicada 2A, no problem. I mean, you know, these two, your options are 2 medium lasers and not a whole lot of armor. The Vulcan, I can fit 2 large lasers in and still have more armor than these guys. So yeah, it's a no-brainer to me. Don't write off the Vulcan 2T. So there you go. That is a lot of builds to look through, but I'm sure if you want to build any of these and move through stuff too quickly, you can always pause the video, take a look, and build off my templates if you're interested in doing that. I'd be interested to hear in the comments how you guys do things as well. As I say, there's no real right or wrong way. There are lots of various ways of playing this game. There are some principles that I think are more right than others, though, such as where to put your ammo and you know, how certain mechs work best. But this is just my opinion, you know. So don't get too het up if you disagree with it. You're entitled to your opinion, but this is just to help people out that might be short of ideas, might not have much experience in the Battletech sphere of games, and might be looking for some inspiration as to how to get out of the early stage of the game with some mechs that will actually hurt the enemy enough for them to get through their missions without taking too many losses. And I can tell you, I've played many hours of this game and of this mod. I think it's probably fair to say, considering that I stream it 5 days a week and have been doing for a long time, since before the mod was even released to the public, probably fair to say I've played this mod more than anyone else out there that's doing, well, I can say I've definitely played it more than anyone else that's doing Twitch streams or YouTube videos, and I'm pretty sure I've played it more than anyone that isn't as well, because I put a lot of hours into it in my spare time as well when I'm not streaming. So I have no problem getting out of the early game stage. Again, using this stuff, using the builds that I've shown you here, and the game really is as hard or as easy as you want to make it for yourself, or as well. Don't forget that, you know, you can choose harder missions if you find stuff too easy. You can up the difficulty, you can up the salvage, you can slow down the pilot XP, you can make this as hard as you like, but these principles, no matter what difficulty you've set it to, will help you get past those early stages of the game. If you have paid attention to what's been said and you're using these builds, they will help. I know, I've been there, I've done it. So you can take my word or leave it, but yeah, it works for me. So yeah, please like, subscribe if you like the content. I will be doing more of these videos. I'll be going over the medium category, the heavy category. I'm going to have to split the heavy one into 2, I think, because you can do a lot with heavies, and you've got to consider both brawlers and long range. Brawlers being the shorter range builds. And then I'll do assaults as well. It's just kind of a little mini series of strategy and lance composition and mech builds, more specifically for this Battletech Extended 3025 mod. And I know this mod's been growing and growing in popularity. I think it's a fantastic mod. I think the guys behind it are doing great work, and long may it last. And there's so much more to come with it in the future, and so many mechs to discover, so many things to try. And that's one of the joys of this game, is having lots and lots of toys to play with. So yeah, feel free to check out my playlists on the channel as well if you're interested in seeing what I do with my streaming. I do try to use a whole variety of things. I try to hunt down rare and interesting mechs and then show what can be done with them when we do get hold of them. Sometimes it takes a lot of searching to find some because they're pretty rare. But yeah, check out that. I do have a playlist for it for my career on this mod, and that's still ongoing. Probably will be ongoing for a little while because there's so much to discover. But also keep an eye out for more in this series if you're interested in seeing how to make best use of the more common mechs you might be encountering in this mod, and how to build them. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next video. Bye for now.